Seawoldt, and this is Authentic Parenting, a podcast about growing ourselves while raising our children. I'm a psychologist, educator, and parent coach. And on this podcast, I explore how you can connect to your authentic self, practice radical self-care, and raise emotionally healthy children. Let's break the cycle of generational trauma for a more peaceful, kind, and compassionate world. Today, are you a controlling parent? Here is what you need to know. When I mention controlling parenting, you probably have a clear idea of what that means. The opposite of controlling parenting is autonomy-supportive parenting, a concept rooted in psychological research, particularly in developmental and educational psychology. At the core of this approach is self-determination theory, developed by psychologists Edward Deci and Richard Ryan, which emphasizes the importance of autonomy, competence, and relatedness as fundamental human needs. By prioritizing these needs, parents can create a supportive environment that empowers their children to thrive. My guest today has written a book all about autonomy-supportive parenting. And it's called Autonomy-Supportive Parenting: Reduce Parental Burnout and Raise Competent, Confident Children. Emily Edlynn is a licensed clinical psychologist specializing in pediatric health psychology who works in private practice with children, teens, and adults. Emily spent almost 10 years working in children's hospitals before pivoting to private practice, which allowed her to start a writing career. Emily has written her blog, The Art and Science of Mom, since 2017, and a parenting advice column for Parents.com since 2019. Her writing has also appeared in The Washington Post, Scary Mommy, Good Housekeeping, Motherly, Psychology Today, and more. She recently added podcaster to her bio as a co-host for the popular Psychologists of the Clock podcast. Her first book, Autonomy-Supportive Parenting, came out last year. We all want to raise competent, confident, resilient, and happy children. And we know that the parenting approach we choose matters. So what exactly is autonomy-supportive parenting? What tools does it involve? And how does it look in everyday life? Let's dive in. I want to recommend a couple of relevant episodes from my podcast. One of the recent ones, called The Harms of Gentle Parenting, with my dear friend and colleague, Dr. Laura Froyen. It's episode 407. It's a fantastic conversation about different approaches to parenting. And specifically, we talk about, the harms of gentle parenting. In episode 421, How to Make Parenting Less Intense, with my dear friend and colleague Laura Froyen, we sort of continued the conversation that we started in episode 407 about the harms of gentle parenting. I would say that's an extension of that conversation. I highly recommend these two recent episodes, and there are a few that are relevant, and I will have them in the show notes for you. Please enjoy, and thank you for listening. Well, Emily, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. I think I want to just dive in and ask you the first most obvious question. What is autonomy-supportive parenting?
Well, it's a mouthful, and I wish there was some more clever, sexier way to say it, but that is what the science is, and I was staying or having integrity with the science. But basically, autonomy-supportive parenting has been an approach and set of strategies studied in research since the early 90s. And it's really the idea of using certain strategies to raise an autonomous child. And it's rooted in self-determination theory, which is a theory, it says theory, but actually it's been tested globally for decades and pretty much shows, I always hesitate as the scientist to say proves, but consistently shows that all humans have three fundamental needs that, when fulfilled, lead to a happier, healthier life. And those three needs are autonomy, competence, and relatedness. And autonomy-supportive parenting is nurturing those three fundamental needs in our children.
I think I would love for you to also define what is autonomy, because, every time I told a parent, children have a need for autonomy, they're like, what is autonomy? So I am pretty sure there is someone out there who is listening to us who's going to have that question. Although, my regular listeners probably will know what that is, but I think it's good to include everyone. So let's start with that. What is autonomy?
Well, and I think it's good to have a common definition, because I also think there are some kind of misunderstandings of what autonomy is, especially in the Western world. Autonomy is often interchanged with independence, but it is much broader than independence. Autonomy is really the experience of having mastery over your life and a strong sense of who you are. So what I say is a strong sense of self and a strong sense of agency is being an autonomous person. It's not doing whatever you want to do, which is another thing parents worry about when they hear this is, so if I'm autonomy supportive, I just let my kids do what they want.
No.
No. And within autonomy, a lesser known piece of it is the idea that we're also respecting the boundaries of other people's rights. And so we can't just do whatever we want, because that often will infringe on someone else's rights. So it's being also respectful of how we're all relating together. So that's autonomy in a nutshell. It's a really big concept, actually. It took me a while myself to really wrap my head around it and come up with a nutshell way to describe it. So hopefully that's helpful.
It is. I think you described it very well. It is clear. And so since we're talking about autonomy, let's also define the other two components of the self-determination theory, relatedness and competence. And then we can go, more practical and deeper.
Sure. No, it's excellent to lay the foundation. So then we have a common language and know what we're talking about. So competence, I think most people have an idea that it's basically feeling skilled, that you are competent. You can do things for yourself and you have abilities that you're proud of. So I think it's important with children because competence breeds confidence. So we as parents need to really be keeping an eye on where are our children feeling competence and where are they not, and how can we help them build feelings of competence so that they can feel more confident. And then that connects to autonomy, because then they're able to live more like self-sufficiently in the world if they have more confidence and skills. And then relatedness is really the foundation. Relatedness is that sense of belonging, that experience of emotional safety in relationships. And so, of course, in parenting, we are our child's first relationship. And so we are creating their first experience of relatedness. And autonomy and competence can't grow without that safe foundation of relatedness. So as we get into more of the practical ways of using autonomy-supportive parenting, what I often come back to is how these strategies are really nurturing the relationship in order to help the child gain autonomy and competence.
Very good. And in the book, you contrast autonomy supportive parenting to what you call controlling parenting. I also want you to talk about what you mean by that. And, control, it seems like, comes in a variety of forms, outright control to sort of masked control, right?
Absolutely. And I want to give you credit for doing an excellent job with this interview because you're hitting all of the important key points that we need to talk about first before we talk about how to do this and how it looks in real life. So thank you. Sometimes people skip around.
You're supporting my sense of autonomy right
And
now.
competence, right?
So you're demonstrating in reality how you may talk to your child given a context and an age development and that kind of stuff, right?
Giving that feedback in the moment, right?
Yeah. I think it's important to highlight that.
Yes, I mean, we all benefit from it. It's a human, need to feel like other people see us as competent too. So, okay. So controlling, I think, is, we can't even talk about autonomy supportive parenting unless we also talk about controlling parenting. And I actually wanted to name the book Everything is Under Control, but the powers that be had other ideas. So I think there's the research definition of controlling parenting, and then there's the reality of our day-to-day parenting. So I'm going to touch on both. So the academic version and what they study in the science is actually the reason autonomy supportive parenting was even studied was in contrast to controlling parenting, to have kind of opposite way to look at different outcomes for kids. So I will say off the bat that controlling parenting is consistently linked to unhealthy outcomes in kids across the board. So that's why it's important. In the science, there's psychological control, which is trying to control a child's psychological experience, including their identity and sense of self. And those strategies, if you can call them that, are things like inducing shame and guilt, withdrawing love, or showing contingent or conditional love, and using so that's the psychological experience. Behavioral control is a little more complicated because there is actually a healthy type of behavioral control and then the unhealthy type of behavioral control. The unhealthy type, which falls under controlling parenting, is using things like threats and punishment and rewards in a coercive way. And the idea is you're just trying to make your child behave a certain way. I'm just going to say we've all been there, so I'm not judging it. But I think we all know it feels better when we don't have to use those things. So then the healthy version of behavioral control are things like having clear limits and expectations. So there's more structure. The child knows what's expected of them and what will happen, like natural consequences or logical consequences if there are problems. And it's using rewards in a more positive way. So this is a bit of a nuance that I know is out there in parenting guidance. A lot of people are really focused on the negative way of using rewards, but there are positive ways where you are encouraging some skill development through celebrating with something to look forward to. So, okay, that's the scientific controlling. Now to talk about the real life controlling. I don't know if you've heard that phrase, your mess is your message.
Yes, I have, yes.
Okay. So my mess is being controlling, right? And so this is why this message really resonates with me. Controlling parenting in real life is that very intensive parenting, aka helicopter parenting, that has become the dominant style of parenting at this point, which is this idea that we need to be heavily involved in every aspect of our child's life and really curating their environments and, staying on top of every little thing they're doing. And it is, first of all, exhausting, but it's also taking away our child's opportunities to build skills and grow and develop. And then there is the fear-based controlling parenting, where there's that kind of anxious mindset of I need to create a world for my child so that they're completely protected. And again, and we are getting fear messages all the time. So I'm not blaming parents. We have an impulse in parenting to protect our child. We are wired to do that. And we're living in a world where there's a lot of fear. But when we parent from fear, we really risk, again, robbing our child of important opportunities to build their own sense of self and confidence in the world. In the book and in my messaging, I talk all the time how we are not an autonomy supportive parent or a controlling parent. We are sliding around on that continuum of today I'm more autonomy supportive and yesterday I was more controlling. So I think it's being aware of the impulses to be controlling and then just checking ourselves with it. And I'm sure we'll get into some more concrete examples, but I want to acknowledge too that stress makes us more controlling, and parents are really stressed out right now. So I think there's a lot of controlling parenting happening with, very loving parents who want the best for their kids. And it's kind of a wake-up call.
Yeah. Do you mind me asking then a personal question? How did this show up in your parenting? What did you notice? How did you become aware of it? I mean, you have a PhD and, you're educated and accomplished. You have degrees in this. But how did you first become aware? What happened? Is there a particular story? I would love to learn about that.
Sure. I mean, for one, the toddler years were very difficult for me because there was just so much chaos. And so I did a lot for my kids that they could have done themselves. And so I can look back and see that I had so many opportunities to help them build skills and confidence back then, and I just missed them. But forgive and move on, and everyone's okay. But I think for me, the most clear example is when it comes to school and academics, because I grew up very internally motivated, very high achieving, always had all A's, always performing at the top. And I just kind of assumed my kids would want the same and be the same. And as basic as this sounds, sometimes we forget our child is not us. Like, they are going to be a different person in the world. But I remember when my oldest was in kindergarten, and there was some standardized test that all of the kindergartners took for giftedness. And as a psychologist, I knew the limitations of the testing. And so that on its own frustrated me. So the parents in general were very upset about how this all went down because most kids are not gifted. Let's just all put it out there. That's the point. So I just remember, though, going to the meeting, feeling my cortisol just so high. I was so activated and upset. And I drove home thinking, what is wrong with me? My child is 5 years old. Why am I so hooked on this? And so that was the moment I knew I had to keep an eye on myself. And I've worked really hard to not focus on my kids' grades. And I'll just say right now, my children are currently 14, 12, and 9. So I have 2 middle schoolers and a 4th grader. And middle school especially has been really challenging because you see more is this predictive of high school and their future? But I have learned the benefits of backing off, and really, I don't focus on their grades. I focus on, are they doing their work? Are they engaged in their learning? Are they, showing up in class prepared? More the behaviors of being a responsible student. And what I've seen happen, my oldest in 6th grade, totally anti-school, not engaged. 8th grade, different kid. I mean, it is, and who knows, maybe it has nothing to do with my parenting, but I'd like to think that.
I think predominantly, as much as you would like to think it's your parenting, I'm sorry to interject, but once I interviewed an expert and she said in the pie chart of influences on our children, parenting is a tiny sliver.
Yeah, and I could.
So it's comforting to know, because if we were to think that we have so much power and control, and we are delusioned, that's not normal. We don't. So we need to let ourselves off the hook, because then we can focus on what matters, right? I think that's where it starts, with our thinking. If we think that we have so much power and influence over our children, then we feel like we're gods, and we set unrealistic expectations for ourselves, raise our anxiety, and the error for failing is a lot higher. And the result is going to be terrible for ourselves and for our kids. So I think letting go of that expectation is like so important.
It's a lot of pressure, and that pressure filters down to our children. And I
It's
think
an unnecessary pressure.
what I've come to is I want to get out of the way. Like, I don't want to, I want to let them blossom as much as their capacity is to blossom and not ruin it or, mess it up, basically. And so I think my daughter had her natural arc with school and was able to find her way. However, if I would have been really high pressure on her grades, that may not have happened. So she tells me stories of her friends who get grounded if they don't have all A's and how stressed out her friends are, and they'll cry if they don't get an A on an assignment. And she actually has expressed gratitude that, which is amazing for a 14-year-old, right? Thank you, Mom, for not being so strict about it. So I think that, there's different ways to think about our influence. Control is an illusion, but we can have influence.
And so do you find yourself in a more relaxed place, or do these control tendencies show up? And what is underneath that when you analyze deep down, what will happen if your worst fear comes true?
Right. Doing all this work has really helped me in my parenting be more relaxed and then enjoy the positive effects of that relaxation. Like, everyone's just more chill about everything is how it feels in the family. I have my moments like anyone where I can feel it's like a body sensation where I feel the flare of wanting to make something happen for my child. And it just helps to be really aware and know, right, what is the worst thing that could happen? And I think the follow-up question to that that's really important is, could I handle it and could my child handle it if the very worst thing happened?
Or like another thing I would ask you, like, what does that tell you about yourself, right? If something flares up now, what is this showing you? What is it that you need to know about yourself or grow in some area, or, right? What is this about?
Right, that self-reflection.
Usually there's something about us from our past, from our childhood and things like that. Yeah, this parental self-reflection and awareness of our own patterns. One person I interviewed, I think he said it well. He said, when it's intense, it's yours. So when we find ourselves reacting to something in parenting, or like you said, that bodily response, that's not a present day response to the present moment situation, right? To our child. Usually, most things are usually neutral events, but the way we react to those, it comes from somewhere from our psyche. We respond to that. I think, and that's the hard work of parenting, right? Recognizing your stuckness or your patterns and loosening the grip and working with that, and seeing every parent has their own areas, for such things. Yeah. Can we, unless you want to say something to that, but I want to go like to more specific examples.
I know I didn't want to take up too much time, but
No worries. Yeah, you can take up time.
I mean, I think that I see it all the time in my therapy work as well. So that I work with children and families, and that helps me with my own self-reflection, is just that awareness of how we're all bringing into parenting our emotional and psychological experiences. And absolutely, we may respond to our child in the moment because something they did reminded us of our parent. And we have this sort of childlike almost response. So I think it is a huge piece of parenting, is having that self-awareness and realizing in the moment, this is about me, if there's a certain reaction, and being able to separate out the child from you.
Exactly. And that's how we stop the transmission of trauma, right? From one generation to the other. So let's talk about a few concrete examples. You do have, fantastically, good examples of how to do the controlling parenting way and how to say or do a specific example, autonomy supportive way. Do you have a favorite topic, favorite age? Maybe we can start with that, or a good example that you use.
I think a really popular one is digital life or technology around the tween age. So I'm happy to get into an
Okay.
example.
Yeah, let's get into an example. It sounds like you're in the thick of having the twins, because as a mom of a teenager, I'm in a different place. Guys, I moved on from your problems. I am in a good place where my daughter is in charge of. It's so funny how 1 or 2 years in teenage years can be so significant in terms of growth.
Yes, it's amazing.
Like being 14 and 16 is a huge difference. My daughter has like amazing, I don't micromanage or anything. Like I raised her with autonomy
Yeah.
supportive parenting. And I know that she can put her phone on do not disturb. She has so many reminders, and the way she engages with the phone is like better than most adults I know.
Yes.
And so, I want to put out this message out there that it gets better. The digital challenges that you have with your 11-year-old is not going to be always there when you have an older teenager. Each year, I think, they grow and change so significantly. It doesn't mean you don't have to do any work. But if you parent with autonomy supportive parenting, using your terminology, it pays off.
Absolutely. And I love that you started with this example of it's fine. She's fine. She's fine with her phone. It's not a threat to her well-being. And I think that, oh, this is such a big topic, and I get really worked up about it just because talk about fear-based parenting. All of us are getting a lot of messaging about how dangerous and risky devices are and social media. And I think it's making us as a collective really controlling with our kids because we are fearful of harm. So it makes sense. However, when you really dig into the science, it's not as absolute as the headlines make it sound. It's not that clear that there is harm happening. There are so many individual factors. So what I really focus on is just pay attention to your child, your family, just keep it in your homes about what's going on. And I think our ultimate goal, we need to think about what is our ultimate goal in raising our child in it. This is a digital world. We're not going back. Like there will be, the internet is here to stay, YouTube. Even if the social media platforms change, there will be social media. I mean, there's just a lot of reality to this. And so, what do you want your child to develop? You want them to develop into a responsible user, right? And to engage in healthy ways. And so, how you described your daughter, those are healthy behaviors. She turns her phone on Do Not Disturb. It's not consuming her life. She's a very responsible person. So I think it's shifting our mindset too around, rather than only attending to the threats, really seeing the opportunities as well, and really seeing digital behaviors as part of skills they need to develop, just like any other skills, social skills, academic skills. So I can share my poor oldest, she's like prime for my examples because she is my greatest teacher. Since she's my firstborn, but she's a lovely teacher and we have a delightful relationship. But, I was following all the rules of a 2-hour screen time limit when she first got her smartphone. We had a cell phone contract. We did all the things that all the experts recommend. I checked her phone every night. And
when did you give her a phone?
Okay, so this is the other thing. We didn't want to give her a phone and got sort of peer pressured into it, where her closest friend got a brand new iPhone for 5th grade graduation. And we were just like, no, we don't want to do this. We don't want to do this. So we pushed it out about 6 months later. So she got it around her birthday that 6th grade year in November.
And may I ask another question for like listeners who live in the United States? If you don't want to say, it's okay too, like what state do you live in? Because it also depends, right? Parenting trends vary and values depending where you are. It sounds like you're in a more liberal state.
I'm in Illinois, and our village is very liberal progressive. And yes, so there's a certain culture and environment that goes along with that. So we did all this, we took all the steps for responsible cell phone use. And it turned, I mean, I would say about a year in. So, she, again, developmentally things change, and she needed all of that at the beginning, but it started to turn into a lot of conflict. I started to see things on her phone that I'm like, oh, you went too much time on this. I mean, it just felt like very micromanaging. And she was starting to get really reactive and defensive and anxious. And I just felt our whole relationship breaking down. And I had to ask myself, what is my actual fear about the phone? And my fear was she would be addicted, that it would take over her life. And then I asked myself, where's the evidence for that? And there wasn't any evidence. The most evidence I had is that our relationship was taking a beating, that we were really disconnected and had a lot of conflict, and that felt terrible. So we had a talk, and here's where I'm going to include the autonomy supportive strategies. Some of these are very instinctual, I think, and natural for many people, but I really approached her with curiosity, which is a hallmark of this, of really wanting to understand her experience rather than just repeating our rules back to her. And so I asked a lot of open-ended questions about what this has been like for her, why it's so hard to have these limits. And then she shared her experience. That helped me have more empathy for what she was going through. It also helped her feel understood. Like I wasn't just judging her and criticizing her. And so then I invited her to collaborate, right, on a solution. Like, where should we go from here? And so we came up with, we weren't going to do the 2-hour limit anymore because it was just so stressful on both ends to have this number. And what is screen time anyways? Like, you can get really in the weeds with that. And we talked about, you can have freedom with your phone as long as you're showing responsibility in your life. So you have chores to do, you have school work to complete, you need to see your friends in person. So I was thinking of ways I would see she's living a balanced life. And we just sort of like flipped the script, right? And this sounds like an exaggeration, but everything shifted. I mean, we just turned a corner after we changed the approach. And I think it did a lot for our relationship, which then opens up. I mean, she's at a fragile age, right? I want her to come talk to me about things. And I think if we would have continued down that road, she wouldn't have. And we've lost so much. So it was a huge learning experience for me.
Wow. Thank you so much, first of all, for sharing. And it is such a hopeful example because I know a lot of families struggle with this phone screen time issue. And to say that you turned a corner and you're in a different, better place, I think it's a really hopeful message for people who are struggling with it. It's never too late to change things, and change can happen. Children are so young and adaptable, and but I feel like parents sometimes can lose hope when they are in the thick of this terrible patch. It can feel like, that's it. I messed up my kids. I'm a horrible parent. I can never fix this. And I think being in that dark place, that in the shame spiral, can do so much harm, because then you don't see that you have agency to change, and you can shift things around. I love that your message is positive and hopeful in that regard. Did you have screen time rules and limits from the beginning when you gave her the phone? You said you had a contract. The reason I'm asking is I want to give the listener more specificity, like real life examples of quote unquote the experts, how they handle things in their homes. What did you have originally? Or if you didn't, how did you adapt, and what changes did you make?
So we included in the contract, and again, this is based on my memory, so best as I can remember, what we had in the contract was the 2 hour screen time limit per day. And I think there was a limit, I think 30-minute limit on TikTok specifically. And she charged her phone in our room every night. And we would have the right to look at her phone and track and kind of supervise activity. However, within that, and I know this is somewhat controversial, we had an agreement, and this was actually important to me. I'm not going to read her text messages or her actual messaging with friends unless I have a significant concern about her mental health or something more serious, because I really feel like that's private. And so in our family, there was a balance of privacy versus security. But, we did look at the privacy settings for the different apps and talked through how she can navigate responsibly in terms of posting. And so we did all of that kind of safety stuff. Honestly, she knows more than we do. So that was enlightening. So that was where we started. And that was the foundation.
Yeah. Well, thank you for that. Yeah, I don't think it's controversial. I also agree. I never read my daughter's text messages or anything. She has a passcode on her phone, which I don't know. I have a passcode on my phone. She doesn't know. Again, it's not like these are universal rules, right? We share these experiences so that a parent can see what's out there and either modify or create their own. You learn that 2 hour rule from somewhere. It's like so arbitrary. I never used that. So you have to go based on your family traditions, customs, values, your lifestyle, your child, neurodiverse children, maybe 2 hours is not enough, right? There's so many factors. And so, but I know parents want like specific advice. What's the right age for a cell phone?
I
Well,
know.
like there's no
It
right age,
depends.
right? It depends. What apps shall we allow? It depends,
Depends.
right?
Yeah.
It's very user specific and family specific, but I like to offer people, how others do it. Like when I gave a cell phone to my daughter was in seventh grade, right? And we did have app limits, and she did have TikTok at that time, which she subsequently deleted because she said it's a waste of time.
Right. She figured that out.
She figured that out. But originally I had given her 15-minute or 20-minute per day on Snapchat and on TikTok. She kept the Snapchat. She still has the Snapchat. And I still have the original app limits when I first gave her the phone at seventh grade until now. And it's so customary. She still has the like 20-minute Snapchat time limit, and she learned to budget and use it. And rarely she asks for extra time. And she never battles. She doesn't say, I'm 16 now, remove the limits or something like that. She knows the benefits of limit because we had conversations about those topics.
Well, and I'll just say one limit that is non-negotiable that actually our kids have expressed gratitude for as well is the phones are not in their rooms overnight. Like that's just not happening. And they're fine with that. But most of their friends have a different policy and are texting at 2 a.m. And I'm like, nope. And they're glad. They want to sleep. They don't want the bother. So I think that is an important limit.
So I want to ask you, when autonomy supportive parenting, or maybe how it can be misunderstood in its extreme form.
I'll say that I've had questions about, does this approach somehow sacrifice the relationship in the sense that you're maybe expecting too much from your child, wanting them to grow up too fast? There's this sort of, would it be parentifying a child to expect them to do X, Y, and Z? So I have had that question, but I think within that was a misunderstanding of the approach, because it's all about connection and relationship. And then another key part of autonomy supportive parenting we haven't talked about is scaffolding. And so that's the idea of knowing where your child is at and what their needs are and meeting them there rather than, doing too much for them and not recognizing skills they do have or expecting too much from them when they don't have the skills. So I think that's a really important piece.
Mm-hmm. You know what's interesting, because you have charts in the book. I always find this, not only in your book, but in general, when it comes to a more conscious way of parenting versus more like conventional way. The controlling parenting language is always short and succinct because I said so. You have to do it because blah, blah, blah. And the autonomy supportive parenting, in this case, usually the statements are longer because there's more explanation and consideration and empathy. What I hear sometimes from parents, and maybe you've heard it too, they're like, oh, that's too long, or, that's too much work. That's like a therapist talk or something like that. What can you say to that parent? Obviously, you're not providing scripts like some
Right.
experts do.
Right. No, they're examples.
Yeah,
Examples. Yes.
there are examples. But what's the, in our language, what are the key things we want to hit and highlight, when we communicate with our children in autonomy supportive parenting? And I opened the page. For example, it says controlling parent would be use directing language. You should spend more time with Amaya. Make sure you're being nice. So that's a more controlling parenting statement. And autonomy supportive, it says, be open and curious. Tell me more about Taylor and how you know she's such a great friend. What feels different with her than with Amaya? It's this, there's this invitation. I'm present, I'm curious, I'm listening. I value you, my child. Therefore, I want to know about your friendship, right?
Right. And that was an example of changing friendships around the early adolescent years, which I've heard a lot of parents not just struggle with, but try and get involved in and kind of continue to orchestrate their children's friendships instead of allowing natural change. So that's what that example was for. But I think you're right. And I do hear that, oh, this sounds like a lot of work. And my response to that is when you really wrap your head around the ideas and it's in your head, that this is what I'm going for, it's not more work. At the beginning, it may feel like more effort because it's different, but the more you do it, the easier and more automatic it becomes. So it's sort of like having in your head, I want to be curious rather than judgmental. Just how can I do that? And knowing that our kids will shut down when they feel judged and ashamed. So that's an example of just kind of, it may feel more effort at the beginning because it's different, but anything you're changing feels like more effort in the beginning, right?
Here is an example, controlling parenting. Directive language, often contingent love. Directive language would be, you have to stop playing right now and clean up. Offer contingent love. Be a good boy and make mama happy by cleaning up when I ask you. Invalidate the child's experience. It's not a big deal if you would just stop playing and start cleaning. Instill shame. You're making it more difficult than it needs to be. Threaten. If you don't clean up this minute, you don't get the whatever, blah, 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 some kind of threat, right? And autonomy supportive parenting. Number one would be show empathy. Second would be provide a rationale, give choices, scaffold, and integrate values of fun and collaboration in this specific example. I want to ask you about providing rationale. I think this can go a little too far. Parents take it a little to an extreme and offer way too much explanation and justification and too much wordy, like word salad, basically throw at their kids. I want you to clarify that for us. What would it look like in a good example and in a bad example that is not effective?
Okay, so the idea of rationale is that it's more than because I said so, right? So it's giving a child an understanding of the why of an expectation. So in that example, that was for a younger child. And it would be, well, if we don't pick up, we're going to we could break your toys and step on them, you know? And so that's an understandable reason for picking up toys. But I think you're right. And especially I do want to touch on neurodivergence because, for example, kids with ADHD, too many words and you've totally lost their attention and they're not even listening. So there are ways that you can give a short rationale for something and you don't need to keep repeating it. Like you can put it out there and move on. And there are kids who really need that sort of firm. There are those kids who will argue in circles for a long time. I happen to have one or two of those, so I know it very well. And in those instances, we've said it, we've explained it, we're moving on, you know, and that is what works best for those kids. So again, there are some differences depending on the child, but we always explain a reasoning for a rule or expectation. And you're right, it's like trying to keep it as clear and concise as possible and not a huge long monologue.
Yeah, because I see it can go so poorly sometimes. I see a poor parent being gentle and kind and kneeling down and explaining something for like 20 minutes that it could have been done with a short, succinct, kind sentence. Not like because I said so, because blah, blah, blah. I know better. I'm an adult. I need to protect you or keep you safe or whatever the example is. And it opens this door for children to, they learn that, this is a negotiation. Let me sharpen my skills as an attorney and talk back and back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And it's just exhausting for everyone. I see that happens a lot in this new way of parenting.
Yeah, well, I think with like gentle parenting that it is ripe for that because the whole idea is I really want to preserve this connection and relationship and be very like kind and understanding. And sometimes we just have to say, that's it. Like we're moving on from this. And this is the rule because I'm the adult. Exactly. And that's important. And you know what? That's another misconception, I think, with autonomy supportive parenting is people thinking the parents don't have the authority because they're asking for their children's input and to collaborate. But I keep saying in the book, you have the veto power. I mean, you are the authority. You have a fully developed brain. Like it is your responsibility. But, and it's fine to explain that to the child, but that doesn't mean you can't ask for their ideas. It's not a promise that you're going to do what your child wants you to do, but it's showing them you have interest and respect for their voice and ideas.
Yeah, and like being an authority, a lot of people have this aversive reaction to that. As a parent, they don't want to be an authority. They think that's a bad thing, right? Because of for whatever reason. But I think in that case, the cleanup case, for example, you said you have to clean up your toys because we can step on them or something like that, or we can break them. But what I'm challenging you, what if we just said, we clean up the toys after we play with them, we put things away, we pick up the plate because we just finished dinner. What if we just, give like the real, more natural reason for things? We clean up because we clean up, not like we're going to step on them, break them, or like parents give different reasons for different things. And it's like, that's a stretch. And like as a parent, you have to figure out what to say in that moment.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like you have to be creative. Why? The why is, this is why we're doing it because this is the way it is. We do the laundry so that we can have clean clothes. We clean the dishes so that, right? I think we don't have to exert ourselves to give like more child-friendly, creative reasons. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah. I mean, I don't disagree. It was just an example of, what would motivate that young toddler, right? They don't want their toys broken. But I think it's fine to just be like, well, because this is what we do is we keep our house clean. We have that conversation with our kids all the time about picking up after themselves is we like to have a house that's straightened up and in order, and that feels better. But my girls who share a room, it's a disaster. It's a disaster. So yeah, they may like pick up after themselves somewhat around the rest of our house with reminders, but they don't have internal motivation to clean their own room or to keep their room clean. They'll clean it, but it won't stay clean. So I think what we haven't talked about yet that is the key to all of this is autonomy-supportive parenting, quote unquote, works through these strategies targeting a child's internal motivation so that they start to do things not because their parent told them to, but because they understand why it's important. And so that's kind of the bigger picture. So in your example, it's learning, it's important to have a clean kitchen after dinner, or, but it's sometimes we want to figure out what motivates our child.
But see, that's what I'm saying. Then we're talking about extrinsic motivation. If we figure out what motivates them, because the reason I asked that is I was just a guest at someone's house and the father said, pick up your plate after the kids ate. And the little boy goes, oh, it's hard. Why should I pick up my plate? And I was curious, it didn't go the right way, this situation. The kid resisted all the way through. And I think that's also another problem. I mean, we can talk about this forever, how as parents, we don't engage children in household tasks and chores in a more natural way. Then they have resistance and they have a hard time. And I think it originates, one of the issues is we don't set expectations the right way from an early days, right? If you say we clean up because your toys will not break, and I'm picking on that example, there's nothing wrong with what you said. But if we don't say we're cleaning up because of cleaning up, but for another reason, how does that affect the motivation internally later for cleaning up?
So one thing about internal motivation is, especially there are certain kids with by nature less internal motivation. And for example, kids with ADHD are known to have much lower internal motivation, especially for non-preferred tasks, like things they don't like to do, right? But external motivators, and this is where rewards can actually be beneficial, can help shape that internal motivation in the future. So it sometimes does start with external, especially for things that kids don't like to do because no one likes to do them. So some people like chores, but most people don't like chores, right? And so I think it's like there has to be that external support first. And then there's this idea of learning. There's this whole terminology I won't get into, but it's like learning the value and why it's important. And then they just naturally do it. The kids start to naturally do it on their own, even if they don't like doing it. So sometimes it has to start, a new behavior needs to start with that external structure and motivation to then turn into internal motivation. And that's just how human behavior can work.
Well, so to wrap this up, Emily, how do you want to leave this conversation? Do you have a favorite quote, maybe a question that you can leave the listener with, or maybe just an overall message for autonomy-supportive parenting?
I think what I really want to leave everyone with is that this is not a zero-sum parenting. So it's not about being autonomy supportive in every interaction. It's not. It's the bigger picture of, am I creating an autonomy supportive environment for my child? Am I generally respecting their sense of agency and nurturing their sense of self? But it doesn't have to be in every conversation and every interaction. I use threats regularly when I need to, okay? So it's not so black and white as I think a lot of parenting guidance becomes. And so that's what I would like to leave the listeners with.
Thank you again. It was a pleasure speaking with you. I really loved reading the book. It's very practical, autonomy-supportive parenting, reduce parental burnout, and raise competent, confident children. Thank you. And we'll stay in touch for your next book.
Sounds good. Thanks, Anna.
That concludes today's conversation, my dear listener, and I hope you found this episode helpful. Did you learn something new? Were you aware of autonomy-supportive parenting? Are you practicing autonomy-supportive parenting? Would you like to learn more about this type of parenting? I love hearing from you. I welcome your feedback, comments, and questions. You can send me a note to the email info@authenticparenting.com. You can call the number, and yes, I do prefer audio, 732-763-2576, and leave a voicemail. And for international listeners, there is a free tool on the contact page of my website. It's called SpeakPipe, and you can record a voice message. Go to authenticparenting.com/contact and get in touch with me. You can also continue this conversation or start a new one in our private Facebook group, Authentic Parenting Community. If you love the podcast and want to help us keep the show going, please consider making a donation. Authentic Parenting is a free resource, and we solely rely on your support. Go to authenticparenting.com/support and see the suggested amounts and make a donation today. Thank you for your kind and generous support. Also, don't forget to rate and review the podcast on your favorite podcast platform. It really makes a difference and helps others discover our community. And of course, be sure to follow us so you never miss a new episode. Until next week, connect to the present moment, to yourself and your children. I am Anna Seewald. Thank you so much for listening.